Hey Sophie, how you doing? Thanks so much for chatting with me today.
Hi, Raelan. It's nice to see you again. How are you?
I'm really good, thanks. Yeah, we did this. We did a chat like this. We were just trying to figure out. We've concluded it was 5 months ago. We did an interview for you
Yeah.
on this channel where you shared your story.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been 2 years ago, given that we've all been in lockdown. I don't really know what's been happening. I mean, I don't know what it's been like for you here in the UK. We haven't left home in about like 4 or 5 months. Everything's just been in
Wow.
lockdown, so it's been really intense, and it is freezing here. There's like a Siberian wind, so it's everyone's feeling miserable and looking forward to the spring. So it's
Oh,
not fun.
wow. Yeah, that sounds a bit intense. It's been in like various stages here, but it sounds not quite that bad. We
Mm,
kind of go in and out of various stages of lockdown, and the weather isn't quite so bad. So yeah, it
yeah,
helps. Yeah, concept of time has gone out the window. But
I
so
know.
for those people that haven't seen it, you and I did chat, and there is an interview with you on my channel. I'll link it here on the screen if anyone wants to check it out. You can see, all the details of your story. But for those people who have not seen it, could you give people just a quick rundown of kind of your history with chronic fatigue syndrome or ME, CFS, and why it is
Mm,
that we're talking about this today? Because today we're going to dive more deeply into some other topics that you and I have been talking about, things that we both think are really important in terms of recovery and mindset and so forth. But I think it'd be helpful for
mm.
people to know a bit of where you came from and why you are passionate about this topic and have some insight.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me back. It's really nice to be back
Yeah.
talking to you. And yeah, I mean, I think that this all began for me just over 4 years ago. I was working full time in advertising. I was doing really well. I was sort of slowly climbing up the career ladder. I was working with an art director. We were both sort of in our prime, and we just got hired at a very successful and very reputable agency here in London. So things were really sort of happening for us. And I had had a history of eating disorders in the past, and I'd always sort of struggled with my anxiety and things. But it was around the summer of 2017 where I noticed that things really weren't going very well for me. So I was starting to get very tired in the mornings when I woke up. I was finding it very difficult to actually get out of bed in the mornings. I was sort of falling asleep at work and kind of struggling to stay awake in meetings and things. And what I noticed was that my health just seemed to be all over the place. So
Mm-hmm.
I'd kind of have these days where I felt really good and I felt quite sort of energized and sort of chipper. And then I'd have these other days where I was just sort of coming down with flu, and it felt almost constant. First it was sort of every other week where I was sort of getting these kind of flu-like symptoms. And then it started coming on sort of every few days. And then before I knew it, it was every day. And there were other strange symptoms that came with it as well. I mean, I'd always struggled with anxiety, but I'd always been sort of relatively stable with my mood. But all of a sudden, I was kind of having these sort of really, really dark thoughts and like really sort of dark feelings of kind of depression and despair. And that kind of combined with the flu-like symptoms and sort of difficulty sleeping, feeling really cold all the time. And I went to my GP initially because I was convinced that I had AIDS or something. I was like, something obviously so serious is happening here, like I'm obviously dying. And my GP did all the usual tests and everything came back and they were all fine. And so then I got really scared because then I realized that actually what I was experiencing could potentially all be in my head, or it was something that the doctors didn't know what it was. And I think that, anybody out there who has been through this kind of thing, it's the scariest thing about it is the unknown, and not being able to have an answer for why you're feeling these things and why you're having these sensations. And the unknown is a really scary place. And eventually, having ruled out all other myriad of health conditions, my doctor told me that I probably did have early onset ME, post viral fatigue syndrome. And I tried to manage it on my own. I tried to sort of treat myself. I kind of sort of did like a lot of Google searches online and kind of, figured out what the right things were to do. And I was really upset because I couldn't find the answers. I couldn't find the right information for what I was looking for. And things deteriorated. I ended up really unwell. I ended up in hospital for a month being looked after by nurses because my parents didn't know what to do with me. And when I eventually got discharged and I went back to my flat, I was in a really bad way. I couldn't get down the stairs. I could hardly walk to the bathroom. I was in a huge amount of pain. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't speaking to anybody. I was just sat in a room on my own in the dark. And it was a really frightening time. And in the end, my mum came home. She was living in Hong Kong at the time. And in the end, she came home to see me. And she took one look at me and said, "This is not going to be your life, and we're going to sort this out." And she got in touch with a specialist who she found through a friend of hers, who actually paid me a home visit, a very reputable doctor called Dr. Gerald Coakley, who I'm still to this day in contact with. And he very slowly got me up and moving again. And he taught me the right techniques and tricks on how to rehabilitate. And 4 years later, I'm now in a very good place. I walk, an hour and a half a day. I see friends. I date. I have a boyfriend who's actually downstairs eating toast while we make this interview. And I have a good life. And, I think the thing that's so terrifying is that there was a period in my life where I genuinely believed that I wasn't going to have this ever again. And I was very close to suicide. I was very close to ending it all. And I think that a lot of people out there who are going through this condition can relate. And what I think the purpose of this interview is, and also like the work that you do so phenomenally, Raelan, I think is really to show people that actually this is a fixable condition, provided you have the right tools and techniques to get better, and you are willing to be patient and you're willing to go through the process. This is fixable and this is treatable. So I think that's kind of, where we are today. And, I've been doing a huge amount of work with this, as I know you have, speaking to people on, weekly basis, a bi-weekly basis on what they can do to recover. And hopefully we can kind of, go through some of those tips and tricks today. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell, really.
Yay! Oh, Sophie, I of course I know your story, and I've heard it. I've heard it many times because I've heard it not only when you told it to me, but when I edit videos, I watch them over and over and over again. So you think this stuff, but when I'm hearing it again just now, it's really powerful. It's heartbreaking, so heartbreaking that you had to go through all that, but then so incredible that how you came past it and how well you're doing now. It's just like this roller coaster of emotions inside of me happening. I'm like, okay, focus, Raelan. Back in the moment. Okay, what are we here to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, things are sort of consistently moving forward, but I think the thing to remember is that this isn't going to be a snap of the fingers thing. This isn't a quick fix. And I think that, the discussion that we're going to have today, Raelan, about, sort of baselines in particular, and like, how to kind of figure baselines out, how to stick to them, and how to then kind of, once they're stable, actually begin to increase and sort of build on them. I think that's really key information that, people who are hearing this will kind of take away with them, and be able to kind of apply to their own sort of regimes and routines. So yeah, I think I'm in a much better place than I was 5 months ago, and I'll continue to make progress. But it's very important that we kind of follow these sort of very strict patterns and principles. So hopefully that's what we're going to sort of touch on a bit today.
And I'm so glad that you brought up baselines, because it's something that's very interesting to me, because when I was recovering, I wasn't connected to the ME/CFS world at all. So I didn't know a lot of the common lingo that people were using. Like, I never used the term pacing. I never used the term baseline. And now they're, household words, you hear them every day. But people write to me quite a bit, asking me questions that sound very much like they're asking me about my baseline. And when I look back, I realized that paying attention to what I understand baseline to be was a big part of my recovery. The questions I get are things around, because exercise and movement was a big part of my recovery process. Not the whole piece, but a big part. So people are like, how do I know how much to do? And how many other activities should I scale back? And so I think this is kind of what people are trying to get at. And I'm not sure I have the best words to describe it. So I would love to hear your thoughts just around baseline, about how people determine that, maybe start with what it is for the people like me that really just didn't even know what that meant. and how you can use that to, help your recovery.
I think the number one thing to remember when it comes to baselines, the number one rule, I suppose, is that your baseline is never going to consist of activities and movements that you haven't, regularly actioned in a consistent fashion for a prolonged period of time. Okay. And there's a reason for this. Okay. The chronic fatigue body very much relies on this function of muscle memory to adapt to and perform activity safely and easily. Okay. Now, muscle memory, which, I talk about extensively in my fatigue guide, and I know that, we kind of touched on in our last discussion, Raelan, muscle memory is this function that we all have as humans, which kind of allows us to adapt to and perform movements safely and easily without having sort of adverse physical side effects. Now, the problem with muscle memory, the really annoying thing about it, is that it has a short shelf life. Okay, it doesn't last forever. If you stop actioning an activity or you stop participating in a certain kind of movement or activity for a long enough period of time, eventually what will happen is by the time you go back to that activity and you start trying to action it again, you'll start to come into difficulty. And if you're a chronic fatigue sufferer, if you haven't done something for a long period of time, what you'll notice is that when you go back to it, you start to get very tired. Your symptoms start to get worse. Your fatigue increases. Your malaise symptoms come on, and you start to feel very heavy and lethargic, like you want to go to bed. Now, if we kind of put chronic fatigue to the side for a second and we just look at muscle memory in and of itself, muscle memory is something that all humans are susceptible to lose. Okay, muscle memory is a function that we all have as humans, regardless of whether we're healthy or not. Okay, so if you look at somebody who goes to the gym regularly, somebody who exercises 4 or 5 times a week because they're, doing spin classes or HIIT training or whatever it is, the reason they can do that level of activity so easily is because they've done it so regularly and their body has built up the stamina and the strength for that kind of activity, and their muscles and their body are used to it, right? It's got in the habit of performing at that level. Now, the problem comes in if you stop doing that kind of activity, right? And if you stop performing at that level. So somebody who, exercises regularly in the gym and, they're doing their spinning or their weights classes 5 times a week, if they stop going to the gym for weeks on end because they've, gone off traveling with their girlfriend, or they've, had a baby, or their life got really busy and they weren't able to go to the gym, the problem comes in when they eventually go back to the gym and they start trying to go back to that level of activity. And what they'll find is that because they haven't done it in such a long time, it's really difficult for them. And it will feel more tiring. They'll feel, more exhausted at the end of the class. And what they'll actually find is that without knowing it, they're sort of building up again from where they are now to how they used to be. So they'll probably struggle a bit, and they'll probably have to kind of build it up gradually to sort of get back into the swing of it. Now, I think that there's kind of
essentially, if I'm understanding, so essentially their baseline is a different place. Is this what you're saying from where it was? Is this the concept of baseline? Okay.
Exactly. Now, obviously, we as chronic fatigue sufferers, we're not going to the gym 24/7. I mean, certainly not in the initial stages, right? Because we have fatigue and it's very serious. And if we started working out and going to the gym, we'd make ourselves much sicker. Okay, so I'm not advocating that anybody go to the gym and start lifting weights. Okay, that's not what I'm advocating. But the principles and the processes are the same thing, because your body only knows what you tell it to know, right? And as soon as you get out of the habit of using your body in a certain way, your body forgets how to do those things. Now, to make chronic fatigue more complicated and to kind of add more confusion to the mix, what I think people wrongly assume that I'm saying here is that I'm saying, okay, so if you've kind of got this idea in your head about, what you want your body to do, if you just kind of keep pounding away at it, you keep kind of, plowing away at your baseline, then eventually, the muscle memory will build up and your body will just do what you're asking it to do, and it will just play ball. Well, unfortunately, no. The problem with us as chronic fatigue sufferers is that we have fatigue, right? So chronic fatigue, it's a fatigue-inducing condition, and fatigue is the main symptom. And the problem with fatigue is if you keep asking the body to do things that it can't do, your fatigue is only going to get worse. So you can't just keep pushing away at the body hoping that it's going to catch up with you. you actually have to bring things down a level, and you have to build things up very slowly and steadily in a very controlled way, allowing your body time to actually adjust to and adapt to what you're asking it to do. So I think in the very beginning, and if I had a £5 note for every time somebody asked me what my baseline is, I'd be a gajillionaire by now, because it's the question, it's the question that we all want to know, like, right, what is my baseline? What should I be doing? Now, the answer to that is, and there's kind of two answers, because if you've been bedbound for a long period of time and you have really radically stopped moving and drastically reduced your regular physical functioning, then you'll look at baseline slightly differently. And I'll talk about that in a second, okay? Because that's the more extreme scale. That's the more kind of extreme part of the metric there. But I think in the beginning, if you have only recently been diagnosed, and up until recently you have been, leading a relatively active lifestyle, and you have been kind of, trying to go to the gym and see friends and go for walks, albeit you might have been struggling a bit, but you will have been doing it, and you will have actually been making your body go through those emotions, and you have been actually moving yourself physically. Then in the very beginning, in that stage, it's a question of creating a bit of a balancing act between not doing so little that you are losing all of the muscle memory that you have and losing your physical functioning, but on the other hand, not doing so much that you are making the fatigue worse and you are exacerbating your condition, right? So in the very beginning, I think the most important thing you can do is you can literally sit down with a pen and paper and look at what things day to day you are consistently doing, from the moment you wake up in the morning to the moment you go to bed at night. And when I say make a list, I mean write down everything. So do you make the bed? And if you do, how many minutes do you spend doing that? How heavy is the duvet? Is it lots of duvets? Is it a little duvet? Is it something quite light? How long are you standing up for if you do the dishes? Are you standing for 10 minutes a day to do the dishes, or are you standing for half an hour to do the dishes? Are you going for a walk? If you are, what does the terrain look like that you're walking on? Is it sloped ground? Because obviously that's more physically challenging. Or are you walking on flat ground? How long are you walking for? Is it an hour a day, or is it something more like 15 minutes a day? Once you've written all of that down in detail and you've got an accurate understanding of what you're doing each day and how long you're doing it for, and the sorts of repetitions and things that you're doing, are you lifting bags or shopping out of the car? If so, are you carrying a couple bags, or are you going like repeatedly backs and forwards for more bags? How are you actioning this? Once you've written this list down, then make a note in the margin, and out of 10, think about, how is this making you feel? And if your score out of 10 is quite high, if you're scoring an 8 or a 9 or a 10 out of 10, then you can logically deduce from that your baseline is working for you and you feel pretty good with it, and it's working. Your body is enjoying it, and it doesn't have a problem with it. It's not making your symptoms worse. If, on the other hand, you're trying to do all of those things and your score is coming out very low, at a 2 or a 3 or a 4 out of 10, then you can logically deduce from that your baseline is not working for you, and you are asking your body to do things that are beyond the remit of what you are capable of doing. So then it's a question of going back through everything and thinking, okay, what can I do here to actually reduce and mitigate some of the things that I'm doing? And it's not a question of doing nothing, because if you do nothing, you will, as you well know, like you'll radically decrease your physical functioning, and then you'll be able to do nothing, and that's not good, because the whole point of this is we want to get better and more physical. We want to get back our physical conditioning, not the other way around. But how can we bring things down to a more manageable level so that we're still moving and performing activity, but not doing it in such an extreme way? So if until recently we've been walking 40 minutes a day, for somebody who has fatigue, 40 minutes a day is actually quite a lot. Could we bring it down maybe to 10 minutes a day? If we're carrying, big heavy bags of shopping back from the shops, look at how much you're carrying. Are you carrying, 500, 600 grams, a couple of items of groceries, or are you actually carrying like 5 or 6 kilos of shopping back with you? That's a lot for someone who has fatigue. So again, think about how you can bring the weight down, but also, is there a way that you could find a shop that's less of a walking distance for you to walk? And it's about kind of bringing all of these things together, looking at your whole day and looking at everything that you're doing and it doesn't just have to be physical things, being on the computer and cognitive activities count as activity as well, and 2 hours on the computer, responding to emails and doing research is very different from spending 20 minutes at the computer doing an online grocery shop. Those are two very different tasks. One is more demanding than the other. So it's about bringing all of these things down and actually looking at how you can still keep, a good level of physical functioning, but not doing it in such an extreme fashion that you're making yourself worse. And I think that is the kind of the key to all of this in the beginning.
Oh, you just explained that so well, Sophie. Thank you. Thank you. You had the words and the insights that I've been struggling to put together. And it's so many little sort of, light bulbs were going off as you were talking. Because I was thinking, because, when people ask me, questions about exercise or daily activity, and like, well, what about, do I need to do it like a movement or exercise program? Can it just be like my daily chores and, doing the dishes and all of that? Can that be, because I'm assuming with this concept of baseline that the goal is eventually to gently, very slowly keep raising it. And I think this is what
Yeah.
people are asking me. And in my experience, because I didn't have the system you just explained for measuring all of that. So of course, I don't claim to know what's good for or right or the best approach for anybody else. But for me, I couldn't use daily activity to raise my baseline. Even though I didn't have that vocabulary, that's what I was trying to do, because I didn't have a way to measure it. And the dishes were never consistent, and the shopping was never consistent, and the grocery bags were never going to be a consistent weight. And I couldn't keep gradually increasing it. Like, it was just too many variables. So for me, I had to eliminate as much of that as possible and focus my activity on things that I could measure and control. So I think I had never even thought of it in terms of there are actually ways to chart your day and really get specific about those activities that you're doing, and that you can see how those, are impacting your baseline and bringing it up or down as well. So yeah, really well said.
Yeah, I wanna just touch on one thing that you said there, okay, because it's really important. And the word that you keep using there, consistency. Okay. That is the buzzword that we are like, tattoo it on your forehead. Okay. The key to all of this is consistency, because you can't build muscle memory if every day you're asking the body to do something different, because the body is confused. The body can't get a grip on what you're asking of it, because every day you're asking it to do a new thing. And the only way you can build muscle memory is when everything is very consistent and very stable. And that's also the only way that you can actually tune into your body and say to yourself, is this working for me? Because if every day you're doing something different, you'll never know what's the problem. One day you feel good, one day you feel bad, one day you've done a lot and then you feel bad for several days, and then you've blown it for a week. And that's not what we want. It's about starting on an even keel, being consistent, allowing the body to adapt to what we're asking it to do, giving the body time to actually sink in with the routine, and then we can start building it up a level. And the problem with baselines is that until your baseline is stable, you can't build it up to the next level. It's like building a house. The foundations have to be stable before you start adding bricks to it. Otherwise, the whole house just falls crumbling down. And that's not what we want. We want a stable baseline. So that's really the key to all of this.
Oh, I love this. You're giving me the language for so many things that I've had trouble explaining. Like, another one that I get asked is, do I need to quit school or do I need to quit my job to get better? And again, I don't know, and I never tell anybody, yes, you should, or no, you shouldn't. I only say for me. But for me, I couldn't get that consistency or that stability while trying to work and do a bunch of other things. So I really had to simplify my life so I could control my days. And I know that's not feasible for everybody, but when I was hearing you talking, that's a bit of what I was hearing you say, like, to build up that consistency. It's an important part of kind of what I've been thinking, like in your experience, what that looks like to slowly raise that baseline. So consistency is a piece of it. And then from there, what did you do, or what does that look like, building that baseline up?
Well, it happens by degrees, right? You're doing it in such an interval like way that everything happens very organically. And I think that the key thing here is to really get a sense of balance in what you're asking yourselves to do, because yes, we want to go back to leading a happy, healthy life, but we also have to remember that we have a fatigue inducing condition. And when you live a life that isn't in balance, the fatigue starts to get worse. So if you look at your life almost as a Venn diagram, everything has to have an equal weight to it. So if you were a workaholic before you got chronic fatigue, you're not going to be a workaholic anymore, because that is not a balanced life. If you were a star athlete who spent 5 hours in the gym every day before getting chronic fatigue, you're not going to be a star athlete anymore, because that's not balanced either. It's about giving the right proportion of time and energy to things. Now, you mentioned, should you still be working and going to school? It's not for me to tell people what to do any more than it is you either. Like, it's a personal decision to make. What I will say is that when you are trying to get over a health condition, you need to give your body the time and space it deserves to do that. And your health, if you look at your life as like a pyramid, your health is at the top. Your health is the most important thing, and that's what everything else comes under. And if your health isn't there, you don't have anything anyway. So if you don't make your health the priority, everything else is going to suffer. Now, personally, I've never known anybody get better while holding down a full-time job, because the job is going to take up so much of your time and energy that you won't have the fuel that you need to do the other stuff. And most likely, you know, taking that work on is pushing you over your limit as it is. And what you'll notice is when you take out that kind of cognitive demand of work or study, your symptoms kind of naturally plateau of their own accord, because, you know, the cognitive activity is just as draining as the physical. Now, should you keep a hand in something that's of interest to you? I think absolutely, because life is about balance. We want to have, you know, well-rounded, kind of interesting lives, and we want to eventually go back to that kind of lifestyle that we once had. So, as I said before, with the activity, it's not about total elimination. It's about finding a manageable balance that is consistent and works for you. And it's the same as if you were diagnosed with cancer. If you had cancer and you were terminally ill, you wouldn't be trying to hold down a full-time job at the same time. And you certainly wouldn't feel guilty about not doing it. You would put your health the priority. And you'll be surprised, because going through this, your priorities shift. And I'm sure yours did too, Raelan. Like, going through this, you start to think, what is actually important to me? Is it working 9 to 5 in an office job that I don't really like, and my boss is a bit of a pain in the ass, and like I don't really want to have to spend my energy and time on him? Or is it, I actually want to be a healthy person, and I want to be a good friend, and I want to like live my life, and I want to experience it, and I want to enjoy myself? Those are the things that we need to be aiming for. Balance. You know, we live in a 21st century society where balance has just been taken off the table. We're not designed to work 24/7. We're not robots. We break. We're humans. We malfunction. Things go wrong. And when they go wrong, the body needs the time and space to put things back together again. And that's what this is about. So you can't rush the body. This isn't about you telling your body when it's going to happen. It's the body telling you, okay, now I'm ready. And now we can start doing this, and we can start playing ball again. That's how it needs to go.
I like what you said about balance, though. And I just want to say something that I think is really important about balance, because I think when we think about balance in our life, we picture it like a pie chart with equal pie pieces for everything, you know, family, work, pleasure, whatever it is, those things. And it's an impossible ideal to achieve. And I think, you know, like when you said, I think what I heard from what you were saying when you're like, okay, if you're a star athlete before, you're not going to be that now. I think you can be a star athlete now. And I think you can be a workaholic now, but you can't be a star athlete and a workaholic. Like, I think balance is, you can have anything you want. You just can't have everything you want. And so many of us that I speak to that get this illness, we're trying to be perfect at everything. We are trying to be, you know, athletes or at the gym 47 times a week. We are trying to be the stars at our job, trying to be parent of the year, daughter of the year, a spouse of the year, or whatever. So I think when I think about balance, I think that is the myth that we've been fed, is that we can be perfect at everything. So yeah, we can be passionate about one area and we can push really hard, but something else has got to give, right?
Yeah, and I mean, you know, if you were a star athlete or a workaholic, I'm not saying that you won't one day go back to that if you want to.
Yeah, of course.
But when you're first diagnosed, and in the years where you're trying to get better, and you're trying to slowly build yourself back up from like the physiological, you know, below ocean level that you find yourself at, you're not going to be an athlete at that point. You know, you're going to be taking baby steps to get back to where you want to be. In the future, you can go out and you can do anything you want to do, and like you'll have a great life. But you in the beginning, it's not going to be like that. It's going to be, what does the body want? What does the body need? And how am I going to do this in a very controlled and safe and stable way? And that is the thing that we need to focus on. And so with baselines, all of this is about consistency. It's about routine. It's about finding what works for you, what keeps you stable, and then very slowly building up. And I think the one misconception that people have is people think that your baseline is when you don't have symptoms. And that is not the case. You will always have symptoms, regardless of whether your baseline is working for you or whether you have done something that is beyond the remit of your baseline. The question is, how do those symptoms feel? Do they feel controllable? Do they feel steady? Do they feel like they're the same each day? Or do they feel like they're getting progressively worse? Do they feel like they're spiraling? And do you feel like your well-being is getting sucked under the carpet? And you know that feeling, right? You know when something isn't working. It's like the rug got pulled out from you, and like you've literally just sunk through the floor. That feeling, that's not what we want. That's not your baseline.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point and really well said. And I feel like this segues well into something else that we've been talking about that we wanted to talk about today, was like the psychological impact of all of this. Because I think it's really easy, isn't it, to focus on the physical symptoms. And I don't even know that it's that they're louder. I used to think, oh, they're just louder and they demand more attention. But our psychological symptoms can be intense, whether it be, the cognitive issues that we face, like brain fog, memory problems, whether it's depression, fear, anxiety, all of that. I think that can be extremely loud as well. But again, to how we're socialized, I don't think we're socialized to pay attention to those. And I don't think people take those ones seriously. So we focus on the physical stuff. So yeah, I'd just love to hear your thoughts and your experience about the psychological impact that this has on people when they're facing this, and, any thoughts on how to navigate that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm really glad that we're talking about this topic, Raelan, because I think that there's a growing trend in the chronic fatigue community to sort of hone in on the physical symptoms and side effects that come with this condition. But I don't think that there is enough attention paid to the psychological aspects of it. And the thing that we have to remember, or the thing that we should really take away from this conversation, is that the physical symptoms and the psychological symptoms, they go hand in hand. Okay, they're part of the same package, and that package is the fatigue. Okay, now the reason I say this is because on the days where on the days where you've drastically kind of overstepped your physical baseline, where you've done too much, you've pushed over your physical remit, you've asked the body to do more than it can handle. Not only on those days do your physical symptoms get worse, your physical fatigue increases, your feelings of sickness and malaise, they go through the roof, but so too your psychological symptoms start to go through the roof as well, and your psychological well-being starts to decline. And they happen in conjunction with each other. They happen at the same time. Okay, now there's a reason for this. The reason is the fatigue, right? You're in this fatigue state, and you've just asked the body to do more than it can handle, which has just exacerbated that fatigue and made it 50 times worse. So it's like you were at sea level, and now you're like at the core of the Earth's equator. Like you've just gone like down 100 floors. And I think that people need to realize putting chronic fatigue aside for a second, I think that people need to understand what effect fatigue in itself has on us as humans. Okay, when humans are in a state of fatigue, they are operating at a suboptimal level. And there is so much clinical research and medical evidence out there that tells us that when human beings are in a state of fatigue, be it through prolonged sleep deprivation or lifestyle factors that contribute to it, we are more prone to physical health conditions. We're more prone to psychological health conditions. And they're really extensive and they're scary. There have been studies done, like when people are in positions of sleep deprivation for chronic, periods of time, they're more at risk of heart attacks, they're more at risk of strokes and obesity and diabetes, they're more at risk of cancer. And if they get cancer, they're more unlikely to be able to get rid of it because their immune systems are so skewed up. And at the same time, there are psychological impacts of it. If you're sleep deprived for a long enough period of time, you're more likely to get depression. You're more likely to have anxiety and mood disorders and suicidal thoughts and tendencies. All of this stuff is really scary. Now, obviously, people who have chronic fatigue, their chronic fatigue is not caused through sleep deprivation. Okay, obviously there are sleep problems associated with the condition, and it can make sleep difficult. And if we don't sleep well, it is going to make our symptoms increase. But the sleep deprivation is not what's causing it. But the body doesn't care. The fatigue presents in the same way, whether you're sleep deprived or whether you've got a chronic condition. If you don't sleep for a month and you don't sleep at all, you will start to feel the same symptoms of chronic fatigue. They've actually done studies on this. There was this fantastic study called, I'm sure I talked about him last time, this guy, Matthew Walker. He wrote this phenomenal book called Why We Sleep. And he took like 50 to 100 people, who were completely healthy individuals. And he made them undergo this experiment. And half of them were told that they had to, sleep only 2 hours a night. And the other half were told that they couldn't sleep at all. And he did this for 10 days. And the people who hadn't slept in 10 days, he asked them to actually write down what their symptoms were at the end. And everything they wrote down, it was like a checklist of chronic fatigue. They said that they had muscle pain. They said that they had fatigue and they had difficulty moving their bodies. They felt extreme lethargy. They had difficulty concentrating. Their mood was disordered. Their appetite was disordered. They couldn't regulate their body temperature. All of these things. Now, obviously, the symptoms that we experience as chronic fatigue sufferers is 100 to 1,000 times worse than anybody with chronic sleep deprivation. But the body doesn't notice the difference. Fatigue is fatigue in the eyes of the body. And I think that, in answer to how we can kind of better manage our psychology and how we can sort of better keep our psychology in play, the answer is if you keep your physical baseline within its parameter, the psychological stuff will balance out. That's the kind of textbook way of looking at it. But I think the other thing we have to remember is that there is a big emotional fallout to all of this. As human beings, we are sensitive and we are responsive to the world around us. And when we are in situations where we're chronically in pain, or we're dealing with a chronic health condition, or we don't feel like we can contribute to the world in the same way as we once could, those are horrible and traumatic feelings to go through. And it's a completely human and normal response to have difficulty when you face those things. I've never heard anybody say, oh, I'm actually really enjoying the fact that I have chronic fatigue syndrome. I'm really thriving out of this. Nobody ever says that. Why? Because no human being, no animal on this planet wants to be in pain or suffering. It's a normal thing to struggle with. Now, if we know that this is the emotional fallout of the situation, the question is, what can we do to mitigate it, right? What can we do to make this situation easier for ourselves? Is it that we just need to have, more sort of constant and closer conversations with our friends and family more regularly, and check in with them more frequently and say, look, I'm really finding this hard. I'm really struggling and I need more support. Is it that you need more people helping you and looking out for you day to day? Is it that you need to enroll in a therapy program where you need to speak to a counselor to, go through the trauma and the grief and process the feelings that you have that have come on as a result of this chronic fatigue diagnosis? Or is it even that you need to speak to your general practitioner and say, look, I'm struggling, like I need to be put on, medication temporarily so I have a bit of a pickup here. And I think that people are very skeptical, when I say, antidepressants can be helpful in this, because they think that I'm saying that, I'm suggesting that this is all just in our heads, and it's not. This is a real physical debilitating condition, but it has psychological repercussions. And how are we going to handle them? How are we going to make this easier for ourselves? That's kind of the thing that we need to be asking, because there's a balance here. There's the physical, but there's also the psychological.
Yeah, you're talking, and it is. Thank you for all of that. That was, I think, really well said and really insightful. And it's just, again, things are going off for me, even just in my own life now, because I went back to work full time a few months ago, and I have weeks where I'm just exhausted because I still have some of my old habits come back, and I'm pushing way too hard, and I'm trying to work out 6 days a week and, keep up my YouTube channel and everything else. So some weeks I just, I kind of hit a wall. And I'm thinking about it as you're speaking, and the thing I struggle with most are the psychological symptoms. Because in those weeks, okay, yeah, it sucks being tired and feeling worn out, but I can deal with that. What I really struggle with is all the anxiety that comes up with it, feelings of depression and frustration and all of that. And you're right, they're like 100% correlated. So if I could just take care of my baseline and keep that in a good zone, for me at least, the psychological stuff I think would mostly take care of itself. And I might be oversimplifying this a bit. And I know there are people that have, mental health issues specifically that need to be targeted, and it's a little bit more complex. But I think for a lot of us, if there is that direct correlation that you're talking about, and taking care of one helps you take care of the other. That's what I was hearing you saying anyways. Is that kind of what you...
Absolutely. It's about, if you keep the physical stable, and you're not pushing too hard, and you're not asking too much of the body, and you're keeping everything, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, but you're not going crazy with it. Everything psychologically comes into balance, because as soon as that fatigue gets worse, everything starts to escalate. You feel more sensitive, you feel more angry, you feel more desperate, you feel more depressed, and then you feel fatigued, and then you have the lethargy, and it all spirals. But if everything is stable, the physical and the psychological come into balance. It's about balance.
Yeah, and the flip side of this that I'm thinking is how unfortunate for people with chronic fatigue syndrome, ME/CFS, because when the physical stuff does bring down your psychological state, it puts you in this pit, because it's not every day. So, I mean, these days I'm feeling pretty good. So I can have a rough week and I can pull myself out of it quite quickly. But when I was really, really sick and I would push too far and I'd get myself into those dark, dark pits of despair, then it really feels like an impossible battle to pull yourself out of this. Like, how am I ever going to get past this? So yeah, it's unfortunate, but it just seems to create this downward spiral that understandably a lot of us find ourselves in sometimes. There's so many things. I mean, you and I discussed quite a few topics that we'd love to dive into, and really I could keep you here all day long and haven't even touched on half the things I was hoping to touch on. But I know that also the people with ME/CFS, cannot handle 2-hour videos either. So I'm thinking, maybe I can invite you back in the future and we can do a follow-up on this to
Of course.
touch on some more topics. And then also I'm so fascinated and impressed and amazed by this, by all the time that you spend working with people one-on-one who are facing this. So, for all the other things that we didn't get a chance to touch on, I know that you're more than happy to have people to reach out to you. So could you just tell us a little bit about what you've been doing and what that looks like and how people can reach you and so forth?
Of course. Well, I got really sick of everybody not having the information that I've been lucky enough to have access to, with the help of my specialists and the therapists that I've worked with, and the physical rehabilitation strategies that I've been lucky enough to actually have access to. So I put together a chronic fatigue recovery guide, which essentially outlines everything that I've been taught by the people who've worked with me over the years. And I give that out free. It's a free pack of information that you can get from me. If you follow me on Instagram, I can send it your way. Just DM me your email address. And until recently, I was running free workshops for people, but they got so popular and they got in such high demand that I have had to start charging for them. And it's a conservative price. It's £40 for the first session, and it's £30 for every subsequent. I'm not a specialist. I'm not a trained medical professional in any way. So my prices are conservative for that reason. Anybody's welcome, anybody of any ability, regardless of their background, regardless of their experiences. I'm always there.
Oh, that's incredible. Yeah, you've been so amazing since I first met you. You've been putting out so much for free, and I've been simultaneously impressed and moved, and like a little part of me concerned. I'm like, oh, don't burn yourself out.
No,
I think it's amazing. And it is, it is a really valuable thing that you're doing. And I really have come to appreciate the role of health coaches and utilizing the expertise of other people who have been through what you're going through. They may not have your answers specifically for you, but they're going to help ask the right questions, and they're going to get it, and they're going to have a lot of empathy and a lot of support. So I think that's really amazing. And I'll of course make sure that all your contact details are in the video description so people can reach you there.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Raelan.
And for people wanting to learn more about your story, again, you've been on this channel before, so I'll put those links as well if they want to see a longer interview diving into your recovery process. So,
Of course.
yeah, thank you so much, Sophie, for
You're
doing this. You are
welcome.
amazing. I really appreciate this, and I know so many other people will too. So yeah, this
You're
is really
more than
great.
welcome. Thank you so much for having me back, and it was lovely to talk to you. And you look so well. And happy 2021. Oh my God, that doesn't roll
Yes.
off the tongue easily.
It's going to be a good year.
Not
It's
so
going to
sure
be a
about that.
better year. A better year. Yeah, easy for me to say. It sounds like things are still pretty tough over there. But yeah. And thank you to everyone watching. We want to hear your thoughts and your questions and your comments. You can reach out to Sophie or you can leave questions here, and just happy to keep talking with everybody and just hear what you think. So yeah, that's it for today. Hoping to have a follow-up of this chat one day soon. But until then, take care, everyone. And yeah.